Alicia.
And I'm Mary. And we're Merten and Morgan.
We're just two educators who have a love of literacy and learning, and we just want to share some topics that are on our mind with teachers and parents out there.
We're excited that we're starting to learn to use some tools that let us talk right to the people who we know care the most about our kids.
So hopefully you will relate to the topic that we have today. This is our first podcast, and so we're going to talk about writing. I teach in an elementary school as well as Mary.
Yeah.
And we are constantly being asked questions about how do I get my kids to write. They don't like to write or they can't write. And so we have some suggestions for you today.
My favorite one is when they say, I don't have time to teach writing, right?
Yes.
That's our favorite.
Yes.
I don't have time to teach writing.
Or I have to teach them how to read.
I'm busy teaching reading, so I can't teach
So
writing.
I can't teach writing.
Right.
Exactly. And we know that when they are writing, they're reading. And you have to go back, figure out what you're going to say, reread your sentence. One of the things that I have recently shared with my kindergarten team is just a strategy of just making books, stapling some copy paper together, maybe 4 or 5 sheets, and just having your students draw and write. I think drawing first helps kids generate ideas and also remember their message and what they are writing about.
Because drawing's the first writing, isn't it?
Yes.
Kids learn how to approximate symbols and draw before they can write letters or even understand what letters are.
Absolutely.
So we do a lot of that too. We do a lot of drawing. Kids' drawings can be a lot more detailed than their even oral languages. Do you notice that too?
Yes. Yes.
And they spend a lot of time adding the details to their picture, which is okay. They a lot of times are surprised when you let them draw first. Do you ever have kids say, "What? The picture first?"
Yes. And I have many teachers actually say you have to write a sentence or two before you can draw.
Right.
And once they understand to flip that, they get a lot more writing
exactly
out of the students. So yes, I do see that.
Then we try to label as much as we can, especially when I'm working with English learners. They don't always have all the vocabulary in English that they need, so we make a word bank that they don't even realize they're making. It's just labels on a picture, and that also helps them with that text feature later when they're looking at informational text and they see labels. They get it.
Yes, they do. We use a lot of alphabet linking charts, too, for our early writers. Even in some of the upper grades, if they still have trouble formulating a sentence or knowing how to spell, we always have some kind of resources. We have a blends and digraphs chart that the older students use. So that picture support still helps them formulate sounds and spelling as well.
What do you do for some of your older kids who maybe are still struggling writers, but they really have a hard time with sight words still? Because sight words are irregular. When they're writing and they're, really needing the scaffolding, what do you do to help them with the sight words? Because they want to spell them correctly.
If they have a writer's notebook, we usually put it an alpha box in the back, and they make a collection of words that they know or words that they should know that they have trouble with, and they have that resource. So as many resources as we can give them to make them become more independent, we do that. So whether it's an alphabet chart, an alpha box where they can collect words. Some teachers just have a regular composition notebook, and as they're learning words, they write them in as well, kind of like a personal dictionary.
That's what we use a lot, and as we're talking, I'm thinking about it, and I just grabbed a couple. We have them at different levels, but they're called quick word handbooks for everyday writers. They're really inexpensive, and they have lots of words that are easy to confuse for kids and for, intermediate elementary students, and then we have ones that are much simpler for the kids who are in the early grades, and a lot of times what the kids will do in this handbook, there'll be words that they've studied but they're still having trouble writing them. They will highlight the word whenever they have to look for it, so that way they can go straight back to it the next time. And they keep those by their side so they can keep their sight words in line, because they know when it doesn't look right, but they don't always know what to do about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Another good strategy I've seen some of the older students use is having some kind of picture. They sketch it, whatever they feel like that word means, to help them remember. Because sometimes if it's a new word and they haven't seen it multiple times, it's hard to go back and spell something you don't really know what it is.
So they sketch it right as they're writing?
So they're sketching
They
it
got like
when they add it to their notebook.
Oh, I like that. That's pretty cool.
So whatever symbol, whatever they relate to, the teacher doesn't give them the picture or the photograph. They just say, what is something that's going to help you remember that word? Because when they come back to it, they're going to have to
Oh, right. Okay.
know. It's like looking a word up in a dictionary, but not really knowing what you're looking for.
Yes. It makes me think of when we do the Frayer model for vocabulary. They create some sort of symbolic representation, but it has to be their own.
Right.
Because if someone else gives it to them, that's the research Marzano's done, says it doesn't work as well.
Right.
Okay, that's cool. So tell us how you make your books. How do you do it?
Well, we have paper available. So initially, I just take 4 to 5 pieces of white copy paper.
Just regular 8.5 by 11 copy paper.
Regular copy paper, and we staple it horizontally, so they're long. And the first page, of course, is the cover. We always do the cover last. And they just start to draw. And then as we're going around kind of conferencing, and you can start this on the first day of school. Just go around, ask them about
draw pictures on paper.
Right, we all are natural draw. I mean, we've had kids, whether your own or students, do the Sharpie on something, right? On the wall or a piece of furniture.
Or their body or
their body,
absolutely.
Body. And so, and you could put out markers on the table if you want, colored pencils, crayons, but just something to spark their creativity, and they will really draw about anything.
Do you ever
if
have
you just
a kid
leave it
say,
open?
I don't know what to draw?
Not too often.
All right.
Especially the younger students, they're always wanting to draw something. They don't really realize at first that they're making a book.
Okay.
You're just kind of saying, we're going to make this book today, and they're kind of like, oh, okay, like Eric Carle or whoever they're familiar with. Typically, you would have read a book earlier in the day and talking about how pictures and words match. And Lisa Cleveland and Katie Woodray talk about that in some of their books, all about the authors. And so we start with just those plain pieces of paper. We go around and kind of talk to them about, okay, tell me what you're drawing, and can you write a sentence about that, or can you label who's in your picture? And most of the time, they're usually using symbols if they're in beginning kindergarten. And they dictate to us, and we kind of write it on the back or on Post-it notes. So that we know what they've said. And then after their book is finished, what do you want to call your book? What's your book about? If they've written something about tigers, let's say, then it would make sense to title your book Tigers. But the good thing is a child can finish a book in a couple of days and then start on a brand new book. So it's not something you have to reteach. You just kind of build from where they are. It's a great assessment tool when you're just learning.
Like writing always is.
Student.
Yeah, the best assessment tool.
Absolutely. You can see where they are, where the next steps, where their misconceptions are.
It helps you even know about their oral language when you see what they write. Yeah.
What phonics instruction is needed.
Yep.
And then how they, really the concepts of print. How they write their sentence. Is it top to bottom? Is it left to right? Do they know how to use punctuation effectively, capital letters? So it's good for all those Common Core standards as well for ELA.
So if you have some 5-year-olds, let's say kindergarten kids, and they're making their book, will they be able to read that book back to you as a teacher, or does that even matter? When they
Yeah,
revisit their book, if it's mostly just symbolic, that you haven't underwritten what they've told you, right? You're not going to write down the
I just wrote
correct.
it like on the back,
You write
so
it somewhere
that I
so
would
you
know.
can see it, but
Right,
not for them to have it correct in their
right.
book, right?
Because sometimes they'll go back and they remember their message, and sometimes they just retell their pictures
Mm-hmm.
for whatever they come up with the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's great for, like I said, reinforcing those concepts about print
Mm-hmm.
and reading one-to-one matching. You
Mm-hmm.
can see if they have spaces, if they understand, letters make words and words make sentences. Do they understand that concept? But that's where the pictures come into play. Why
Mm-hmm.
it's important for them to have some kind of illustration, because they can always go back. That 3 ways of reading.
Mm-hmm.
Can you read the pictures? Can you read the words? Can you retell? And so they're able to have discussions about their books, even if they don't quite remember exactly what they've written.
Okay, that's
And
not the goal. Is for them to be to accurately tell you what was on the page. That's not the
no,
most important thing.
it's
Okay.
just to get their ideas down and start to get some of those early literacy skills in an authentic way that engages every student. It's automatic choice because they have choice in what they're writing about.
How they're drawing it, the tools
Yes,
they're
their tools
using.
they're using. And then we start to add different forms of paper.
Mm-hmm.
So you can even, do a vertical book, or you can add pages.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can start to have a box at the top for their picture and then add some lines at the
Mm-hmm.
bottom. So they have some paper choice as well as you continue through the process. And it's good because they start to, once they're exposed to more read alouds and different authors and illustrators, they start to say, hey, my book's kind of like Kevin
Oh, now
Hinckus,
they start to have
or
mentors because they
yes,
see that connection.
yes,
Well, yeah. Plus, they feel like an author from day one. They feel
absolutely.
like I can do this. This is not something beyond me. Instead of being given a set of skills that they don't manage and control yet, and not being able to live up to that expectation, they immediately are doing it where they are, and so they can just express themselves without having, any restrictions
Yes.
put on them as far as their literacy level or whatever, how much preschool they may have had or how many books have been read to them or any of those factors.
Right. They're always ready to produce something
Yeah,
because they can.
because
So
they believe they can.
and every child can do it.
Yeah. You're kind of
So
cashing in on the young kid thinking, I can do it.
yes. Well,
Yeah,
yes,
you're
because
banking on
they
that.
at that age they still believe they can do anything.
They do. Yep.
And I just think too, it's a great segue into that independent reading, because a lot of times we don't have books that they can read just yet,
Mm-hmm.
but they can always, just like we said earlier, they can always go back and reread the pictures of the books that they have created, because they know the topic, they're the creator.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not too abstract yet. And then they have this collection of books that they can read
Mm-hmm.
from
By
day
their
one.
classmates and themselves, right? Where do you store the books? How do you make it so kids can access those easily?
People have had different, in Lisa Cleveland and Katie Woodray's books, all about the authors. They have different bins. Sometimes they separate it from boys to girls on one side of the room.
Hmm.
My kids just had book bags, so they
Mm-hmm.
kept them in their book bags. And after they hit a certain number, I just send them home. Um, Once they start to dig into our library, or their cubbies are overflowing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's nice to keep them for a while. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely good till maybe after the first report card. You have a lot of great authentic work samples right there to show parents. Kids can see their growth really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
from one book from like book 1 to book 8,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and see how much they've grown. They're great conferencing
Yeah.
tools.
I'm
So
just
it's
thinking
just
about
great.
one of my own kids who used to write with me when he was little, and we found his notebook not too long ago, and he had drawn a Game Boy on it with the little controllers and written a very simple little story, which was a
Yeah.
sentence, and he just went on and on about, oh, I remember that Game Boy, and I remember when I wrote that with you, and I remember when I drew that, and it was like, Wow, it was so cool that we found that notebook because he was probably 4 when he did it, and he's
Right.
14 now. But he thought he wanted to go through every single page, and it was almost like a diary of him being 4. But they were
Yeah.
just sentences he wrote with his mom because his mom's a teacher, trying
Yeah.
to get him to write. But he loved it so much. So I think they will value it.
Yeah, and I think it's a great thing to do at home. Like if
Mhm.
parents come to you and they're like, I can't get my child to write, what do I do? And maybe not focusing so much on the handwriting aspect, but just sitting down and making a book together and stapling some papers together, giving them crayons or color pencils or markers and just letting them go.
What might you do as a next step after you do your first book, and then I'm assuming you let kids read each other's books, right? If they want to, they can read each other's books.
They can't. Well, typically, because it's a workshop model, you would do
Mhm.
a
Okay.
share at the end,
Okay.
and maybe pick that child that you that is exhibiting a teaching point that you want to highlight.
Mhm.
Um, to probably springboard for the next day. I would just say because I'm thinking of kindergartners in my head at this point, or emergent writers in general.
Mhm.
One of the first thing I would think of would be spacing, just
Mhm.
because when they to connect it back to a normal book,
Mhm.
authors use spaces so that we can read the words,
Mhm.
and so that would be the first place that I would begin.
Okay.
We're when we write words down, there has to be spaces in between so that we can read them,
Okay. And then you would
and so
show
they
them
know.
that in a book, like an
I would show
actual
them
book,
that
so that
yes,
they can
this
all see the book.
yes.
Okay.
Um, Susie today used good spacing in between her words. That helps us read better. Just like when we read our Eric Carle book earlier, do you see how uses spaces so that the
Okay.
reader can read what he's written?
So then, after you would do something like that, would you have the kids practice that? Would you give them an opportunity to write some words with space between them?
I would maybe just invite them the next day in workshop to. That would probably be our focus for that
Mhm.
day when you're making your book today. Remember, you're going to want other people to read it when it's finished.
Mhm.
For you to read it, make sure you try to use spaces in between your words.
I love it. It's so
And then you just springboard from there.
it comes from the kid. It's one of
Yes.
those starts at the child kind of techniques,
I
but it
think,
also is a rich opportunity for teaching and formatively assessing and knowing what you're going to do next time.
yes. And it's just so engaging.
Mhm.
A lot of times they don't want to stop. And they write for a while,
Mhm.
longer than you would expect,
Mhm.
because they're invested in
Mhm.
this book that's theirs. Not something they have to do, but something that,
They just
they're
want to
excited about
do.
doing.
What
Mhm.
about the covers? Do you get fancy with those? I've seen people
They
do
can.
cardboard covers and cloth covers and things like that.
I just use my paper really. I did go get some. It was before all the tape, the
Mhm.
different tape came out with all of
Oh,
designs.
yeah. Mhm.
Um,
The duct tape.
the duct tape. It was
Mhm.
just plain colors at that point.
Mhm.
This was
You're
like eight
so
years ago.
boring.
So, but at the time,
That was
the
before people were
colors
making
just came
prom
out.
dresses and things out of
Absolutely.
tape.
And so we just really put tape on the binding, and that was enough.
Yeah,
They
then
thought
it
that was
looked
great.
like a book.
But I know that there are companies and things that you can send your
Yeah.
books out for your classes, and they
Mhm.
will bind them for you
Mhm.
um, and do those types of things. But really, the kids just want they don't
They don't
care.
care. Yeah, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Well, I know when you were telling me about this, it made me think about generating text with kids, how powerful that is even before they feel like they can write, especially if they're English learners and you can't find text that really meets their needs, that they can use a strategy called language experience approach. And you can watch a video, have some sort of common experience with the kids. It can be a virtual or a real experience. It can be a book you read. And then you work with the kids to write about that. And that written piece that you do with the kids becomes their text for doing, you can cut the sentences apart and have them put them back together. You can take the sentences and cut them into words and have them put the words in order. It's a lot of what you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about, but with older kids who are still at those emergent stages, they really enjoy having a text that's about something that is very um, um, literally in their world. And it also is helping them build background knowledge at the same time, which they don't always realize that they're doing that. But then they can also, you could make a closed activity out of it. You can leave some words out. If you're working on sight words, you could leave a couple sight words out, see if they can, figure out where those words go. But that just becomes your text for your instruction during your part of your literacy time, and it's just a really effective strategy. I'll never forget one time doing that with some kids who were from Cuba and had never seen snow before, and it snowed, and I took them outside on the playground, and we came back in and we wrote about that, and I think that was their favorite thing that they had ever written, because it was their first time to see snow.
Yeah.
So how are you going to find a better text than that for that particular group of
Right,
kids?
they actually experienced it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that kids can do themselves. They can create their own text, they can write their own books, they can be their own author and reader and
Yes.
guide themselves. What would you tell a teacher to do to get started? What should she? Would you start with kindergarten? You think is this something that begins with kindergarten, or?
I think this is something I think you could do at any level, really.
Yeah.
And I would just say have some different mediums available: colored pencils, crayons, markers. Every child likes to use colored pencils, crayons, and markers.
They do.
It doesn't matter how old you are.
And that's so
And
true.
everybody has something to say.
Yeah.
I think as you get older, you might just have to have the conversation about not everyone's an artist. Just do your best. Don't worry about it. It's just for you.
What about an error?
And I would just have some.
I'm sorry to
paper.
interrupt
No,
you.
you're fine.
If they have a mistake and they're using marker and they're a little older, because they don't like to have those mistakes, what do they do? Do you think they should? I don't know.
I think they could just ask for a blank piece of paper and staple it, and then just replace the page
Or maybe
if it's
glue
that
it
big
on
of a
top.
deal.
Yeah.
Right. If
Okay.
it's that big of a deal.
All right.
Yeah.
That's easy enough.
I wouldn't throw out the whole book.
No.
Just give them some problem solving options.
Yeah. Because they don't want scribbles in there either.
Right.
They think
Understand.
they're treating it like a book. They want it to look good.
Yeah, and smaller kids will just exit out and keep going a lot of times. Or
Yeah.
I've seen kids make something else that it wasn't intended for. They just kind of change, like if it's a drawing, they just change it into something else. Or they simply mark out the word, and especially if you've taught them to self-edit, they just do it and go on. And then if they want that page changed, they just redo it on a different. So I would just staple some paper together and go.
Wow.
And see what happens.
It sounds so easy, and yet, you don't really see it being done very often.
It's a very simple process with so many great advantages. I think maybe it's too easy, and so we may be afraid of that. What are we really going to get out of it? What are the kids really going to learn from it? And once you look at it from this lens, it's really they're learning a lot, and you get a lot of information about your child as a reader and writer.
Yeah.
But the process is pretty simple. And then, but you really have to look at their writing and go from there.
I have one more question for you about this. What would you do, or what would you say to someone who says, but the books are for the published work. They're not for your first try. Like an author doesn't really put their first thinking into a book. What's a different way for someone to think about that? If they're, like a lot of times we publish a kid's story in a paper, looks like a
Or
book.
like a brainstorm.
So that they know it's like, this is the special final, you revised whatever you did, now it looks like a book.
So I would maybe say these books are a way to get them started with just writing. And if you want to officially publish something, you choose the book that you want to publish. The one that you really want to publish for the public to read.
Okay.
I think
Make that differentiation
yes.
for them. I think they can understand that.
Because there are some things that are just for you.
Yeah.
And there are things that you want to share with an audience.
Yeah, and I think you could make that connection to like a journal
Absolutely.
or a notebook. Those are books too.
Right.
And those hold your ideas before you're ready to share them with everyone.
Absolutely.
I like that. That's pretty cool. Have you ever thought about digitizing this whole process? Have you ever thought about letting kids make digital books?
I have actually.
Okay. Your face is so funny.
I have.
You're like, you thought you got me with that question, but you didn't.
But I can't remember the medium that we use. I can't remember the.
Was it the iPad or what was it on?
No, it was about 10 years ago.
Okay.
That we did this. And I can't remember.
Was it, what grade did you do it with? What grade?
It was first grade.
Okay.
And
computer or tablet?
It was a computer, not a
Okay.
tablet.
All right.
And it was in our computer lab.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see it in my head, and you would know it, but I can't think of it. So
It's
maybe
not Photo Story, is it?
it might be Photo Story.
Okay, that's a good one.
It might be Photo Story.
Yeah, that's a free app too, that you can get.
But you could scan. We literally scanned their picture in,
Okay.
and then they typed their text in, and it made a little book for them, and you could print the book out.
Oh, that's nice. I like that.
I'll check and see if it's
Was that
Photo
called
Story.
Really Reader? Maybe it was that one. That's another one we used to have a while ago.
So what I can do is when I remember, I'll
Mhm.
put it. I'll put a link in our
Okay. That'd be great.
podcast, and so if anyone wants to, if it's still around, I'm sure there are many out there though.
Yeah.
Since then, updated versions, but
I know my kids really love on the iPad using one that's called Puppet, Puppet EDU. It has a little rabbit, and I could put a link to that too.
Okay.
But Puppet is a really nice. It basically is just for digital stories, and the kids can take pictures with the iPad of what they drew. They can write about it. They can also narrate it with audio if they want to. And they can share that to a Google Drive, or if you're using Seesaw as a digital portfolio, they can upload it straight to that. It's free, and they love it. They really do. So, all those things. All right. Well, I think that's enough for us for tonight, don't you?
yeah.
Pretty exciting getting kids to write. I think writing can be their favorite thing if we just let them do
Definitely.
it and stop, putting our fears. And we were going to talk about that for a second. Why do we think teachers don't like or don't teach writing as much as they?
I think we feel like it has to
Good.
look a certain way, and I think that pressure, probably comes from administrators, and I think it's scary sometimes to just let the students go, especially younger students. I feel like we feel like we have to navigate their way for them. But it's just so interesting if we just kind of give them the tools and step back and watch. They come up with things beyond our expectations most of the time.
Their thinking is a lot deeper than we
Yes.
give them credit for. I know I've experienced that with some, especially 4th and 5th graders, sometimes boys, because they've got a female teacher, me, and they might be a little reluctant to say something, but when they write it, especially if we're using a mentor text that has a lot of feeling, they will say some of the most profound things that just, I'll show it to a teacher and they'll say, where did that come from,
Right.
I've never heard that student say anything like that. So it's really powerful for building those social, emotional relationships and understandings. Don't you think?
Absolutely, yes. And then mentor text, that's probably a whole nother podcast.
That's
but,
another one. We got those.
Using mentor text as examples of writing just takes them to a whole nother level.
Yes, I want
For
to do
sure.
that for sure in the next one. But right now we're almost at the 30-minute mark, and that's probably as long as anybody wants to hear us talk about drawing and writing books.
Yay, our first podcast.
Our first podcast. Yes, we're going to try to have one, maybe one every other week to put up, and you'll have a chance to comment. And till next time.